Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Building a Positive Company Culture, Practical Strategies from Practitioners. We're going to get started in a few minutes. We're just going to wait for some last-minute folks to jump on the line. In the meantime, we'd love to see where everyone is dialing in from. Maybe share your name and location in the chat panel. Thanks. All right, let's get started then. So hello again, I'm Bart McDonald, co-founder and CEO of Sapling. On behalf of our co-hosts today, Torch, a leadership development company that uses one-on-one coaching and software to unlock leadership performance, and Deputy, a platform that helps you manage your workday from any device with their flexible scheduling software and time clock app designed to support any kind of workforce. I'm excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Building a Positive Company Culture, Practical Strategies from Practitioners. For many members of the people operations community, you work at a high growth, fast-paced company where culture is being defined around you every single day. Now, how can you make sure that those daily changes are working towards a positive company culture? Many of you submitted the questions that will be featured and answered in this webinar today by a panel of experts, ranging from how you translate company culture into your onboarding and leadership development experience, to strategies for creating a culture of feedback, and the extrinsic motivators outside of snacks and bonuses that drive sustainable behavior and change. But before we get into the meaty discussion and introduce you to our incredible lineup of industry experts we have joining in today's discussion, a few housekeeping items. Firstly, we'll be sending around a recording tomorrow morning so you can rewatch the webinar and share across with your team and network. You can also check out past webinars over at saplinghr.com. Secondly, at the end of today's webinar, we'll be sharing out a SHRM code and HRCI code for you. Thirdly, hear anything good today, please add it over to Twitter at SaplingHQ with hashtag PeopleOpsCollective. And finally, we're going to save around 5 to 10 minutes at the end for you all to submit additional questions to our panelists, and we'll make sure to send those out throughout the webinars so we can answer them. All right, without further ado, I'm excited to introduce you all to today's speakers. First up, Natanya, perhaps it'd be great if you could give a quick introduction to yourself.
Sure. Hi, so I'm Natanya Matheny. I work for a company in Vancouver, British Columbia. I think I might be the only Canadian representative on this panel. We've got around 75 employees and we're in the mobile game development business. I've been leading our people and culture team here at A Thinking Ape for the past around 4 years. And previous to that was working for a corporate team building company where we did corporate training and team building events for big Fortune 500 companies across North America. I love the topic of people and culture, and on my team I've got people focused on branding, recruitment, training and development, employee experience, studio, facilities, finance. So we are a lean team, but really encompass the whole scope of HR.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Natanya. Bruce.
Hi, my name is Bruce Phillips. I am the managing director and partner for Aprio Cloud. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called HPC, which is a cloud CPA firm. We were early adopters of the cloud and became a completely virtual CPA firm, which was very unusual. We grew from 6 to 40 people in about 3 years, and then sold our cloud practice to Aprio, which is a top 100 CPA firm. So many changes in culture both from a virtual being CPAs and also being part now of an organization that has more than 500 people. So.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Bruce. Excited to hear some of your insights today. And over to you, Alice.
Sure. Hi, my name is Alice Tang. Currently, I am the head of people operations at House Canary. Been with the company for about 2.5 years. There's about 115 people at the company. Currently, we're located in San Francisco. Well, that's our main headquarters. We're in San Francisco, California, Boulder, Colorado, and also San Antonio, Texas. I guess prior, I was with Cisco for about 9 years, and I was focused on community building and employee engagement for the university hires and any employees that were early in their career. I have experience in culture, employee experience, onboarding, offboarding, performance management, compensation, benefits, and communication workshops. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And then Michael.
Thank you, Bart. I'm happy to be here. I'm a leadership coach with Torch, and I have clients on 5 different continents, and they're in small companies up to large companies. In my past experience related to this webinar, Building a Positive Culture, I was the Global Chief of Employee Communications and Engagement at the FBI for then FBI Director Bob Mueller. I also served in a role where I supervised the innovation program and also led a community of practice where a positive culture is really important, where it was with a coalition of cities in reducing violence in the United States. And then later I was Division Director for Communications Engagement at Homeland Security, the TSA. There was a workforce of over 60,000 employees. And then another thing I thought that related to building a positive culture is I have a background in improv comedy, where being positive and collaborative is quite important.
Incredible. Well, what an amazing and diverse group of panelists we have dialed in today. I'm incredibly fortunate you could all make time to share your insights, learnings, and experience with myself, and most importantly with the community at large dialing in today live or in the recorded webinar to follow. Thank you all very much. And last but not least, a little about myself. As I mentioned a moment ago, I'm Bart McDonald, co-founder and CEO of Sapling. Like our lineup of incredible industry experts today, I myself also come from the industry, classically trained in human resources and organizational psychology. I've spent the larger part of my career at the intersection of human resources and technology. First, consulting into medium and large enterprise around their employee experience, onboarding and systems implementations, and then really realized just how broken both the candidate and employee, as well as people operations and back office experience has been around employee onboarding and the broader employee experience. So 3 years ago, the team and I here at Sapling set out to change this. Sapling today is now the leading employee onboarding and HR platform, supercharged for medium-sized companies. Our software automates HR processes, creates a consistent and red carpet employee experience, and most importantly, empowers people operations teams with the connectivity, data, and insights to lead their global workforce. And we're very proud to be the platform of choice for incredible brands like Envision, Kayak, On Deck, DigitalOcean, and more, and believe when you create a great employee experience, HR can better support their teams to do their best work. So before we jump into some of the content today, we wanted to see where really the main concerns are around company culture. So we're going to actually launch a quick poll now on the screen. You can see that come up in front of you. And some answers that we receive might help inform our panelists on the context of where everyone dialing in from today. So I'd love if everyone could just take a quick moment to jump onto the quick poll and share their thoughts on what part of your company culture needs the most work. Is it remote culture? Is it feedback? Office environment? Is it around the values and the mission? Or is it around employee learning and development? I'm just going to leave this up for a few more moments before kicking this off. All right, excellent. So very interesting here. We can see remote culture is around 15%, feedback's around 21%, values and mission seems to be the lowest, and most importantly, employee learning and development around 28%. So just a note to our panelists there today, that definitely seems to be the largest percentage in terms of where the audience are really wanting to focus on and how they can support their company culture through learning and development. All right, so to kick things off with today's format, we're going to jump across to the formal section where I'd like to get our panelists to jump into. Oftentimes, company culture works and employees are happy. Then your team goes through a round of rapid hiring, and the culture that you have at the early stage no longer fits with the size of your new team that you've hired in. So we're going to launch into some questions now. Firstly, how do you keep or adapt the company culture when your company grows really quick through the early stages? Tanya or Alice, do you have any thoughts you can share?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first there. I can't say if I've experienced the aftermath of this yet, where there's been a big shift, but we're currently in a state of scaling up, and this has been a concern and a conversation at the leadership table for the last several months, and how can we scale our organization but retain the true essence of our original culture. And we've talked about ensuring that we stay really true to our celebrations and our rituals and some of the quirky things that make us the way that we are. And we truly believe that in our core values, if we're using those as the lens for our decisions, how we hire especially, then that should set us up for success. Our recent hires have been really great additions to our culture so far, and this probably has a lot to do with how we hire and the emphasis we've been placing recently on our values in that process. So I think if we can focus on that, hopefully that should help.
Yeah, so you talked a lot there about the rituals and values. Alice, I'd love to hear if you have any different views or really more the same.
So I think when I joined House Canary, I think I was employee number 60. Now we're at 115 and probably growing. And there was a lot of talk even from former employees that have been with the company for 5 years that, more people are coming, it's not the same. So one of the things that we did maintain that we do, so every Friday we have a lunch and learn, and it's a mixture of presentations from like business learning, or it could even be anything that they're a subject matter expert in. For instance, we've had a paper airplane contest. That was fun. That really got everyone together. Last week, with using our own resources, so we have a snack program, we had an Iron Chef competition, and we basically just, the contestants, they had to use what we had as a snack, and they created these dishes, which actually, surprisingly, that was like the most attended lunch and learn, and that really got everyone involved. Our CEO, president was there. So just having those type of activities, I think really, and they're pretty low cost too, like paper airplanes, you just have use white, paper. So that's some of the things that we try to do to maintain the culture. And also, as we're growing, we usually just hire people that are also adding to that culture, with their own unique personality.
Very helpful. Absolutely. Michael, I might pass over to you. And I'm not sure here if you want to draw on your experience from obviously being at a very large organization, being at the FBI, or in your role as a facilitator and coach, where you've got a unique porthole into seeing how other companies and their leadership teams presumably are thinking about managing culture during scale. Do you have any insights or experiences you can draw on and share here?
Sure. One thing that comes to mind is when you talk about, say, if you have company values, how to reinforce that and say that, make sure that new employees understand and appreciate the value, which is something Tanya was talking about earlier. As one thing came to mind is I work with this police chief in High Point, North Carolina, and he would make sure, and it's a relatively small police department, and so it's similar to a small or mid-sized company. He would bring in the new officers that might have been hired through a rigorous hiring process, but they'd bring them in, and he'd bring them into the chief's office and go over the police department's values with them and ask, do you understand what these values are? And they'd say, yeah, and he'd discuss them with them. And he said, okay, because if you end up not serving the community according to these values, then we'll have a different conversation on your way out. And so he would make sure personally that every officer in his department understood the values that they were trying to live in their service to the community. So having that ritual where your CEO is involved and brings values into the way he interacts with, or she interacts with employees, I think is also very important.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you for those insights. Moving on to another topic now. One of the things that we have as really a thesis here, and I know it's shared by many other teams around the world, but one of our theses here at Sapling is that the future of work is increasingly distributed and remote work. In fact, it's actually how our team operates, headquartered here in San Francisco, with teams all across the world. And many of our customers, from Envision to DigitalOcean, all have remote or distributed teams. And we're seeing an enormous trends in the community of teams hiring out more and more in a distributed fashion. Now, culture within a distributed team is very different in terms of communication and running versus when you have a team that's all working out of the same office floor or across the same building and city. Maybe Bruce, it would be great, given your experience, would we love to hear some of your thoughts on creating that seamless culture that runs across borders, time zones, countries. Do you have any thoughts you can weigh on here?
Sure. So it's really interesting. I think one of the things is tools. So we rely very heavily on Slack and Zoom. And I'd like to say one of my observations over time has been, I think we communicate better as an organization than other companies that I see that are sitting in offices next to each other where nobody gets out of their cubes and they don't talk to each other. Our team is constantly on video calls all day long. They're incredibly close. There's all kinds of fun, like Alice was talking about, in Slack, and everything from birthdays to dogs to weddings to, we have a king and queen of fun that are responsible for doing and getting people together. But one of the things I think is really interesting about that is that it creates a family type environment, and I think it's really important in remote teams to see each other and have some face time. So what we did is, I started a few years ago, I said, listen, when we hit this number of MRR, we're all going to go to Mexico to an all-inclusive resort, and we took everybody there. And I got to tell you, I mean, half of the people, well, most of the people had never even met each other. I'd never met half of them. Boy, they're still talking about it. What a great thing. And, by the time everybody came back, they all knew each other. What happens in Mexico stays in Mexico. And recently we actually, now we're part of Aprio, which we went from 40 to 60 to part of a 500-person company. We couldn't quite do Mexico, but we actually just had our I'm going to call it probably biannual company retreat in Nashville, which was a very well orchestrated event that took several people a whole lot to put together. But we had 60 people in Nashville for 2 days with bonding and fun and team building. And I just think that kind of stuff is really, really, really important, especially in a remote and workplace environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Alice, do you have anything else to share? Obviously, Bruce mentioned it.
Bruce mentioned using Slack and Zoom. That's actually what we use as well. For instance, we have like a general space. So if someone was to have a new baby or like sharing life news, they would just share it on the general. That's one way that we have the fully distributed teams maintain that news. We also have a Slack channel called the Distributed Team Canaries. So we call our employees Canaries. And that's also a group for them to connect with one another. Tips on like if they're flying to visit the headquarters, what's the best way to book a flight or whatever. So there's that to kind of maintain that connection. We have interest groups such as like dog channel, dog lover group, cats, lovers. We also have music and kids. So that's one way for everyone to share and get to know one another. And that's what we try to do. We just use our existing technology to share all that.
Amazing. Thank you for those insights there, Bruce and Alice. So moving on to another topic, I'd love to get some understanding of how your team feels with regards to company culture. Obviously, it very much depends team by team, but I'd love to hear some thoughts around some of the best practices for getting that pulse check on company culture. Perhaps Michael or Natanya, have you seen any experiences here that you can share in terms of the right or wrong way to get the pulse of a company culture?
Sure. For me, I think software can be really helpful to get a pulse of the company culture, like how are employees feeling, and then you can disaggregate it by certain parts of the company. So you might know that one team's feeling a little happier, more engaged than another team. And then you can use that to help your managers support one another. So if a particular division of your company is more engaged and doing better, ask that manager to share with the other managers in a peer session, what are you doing differently that maybe your peers could learn from?
And Natanya, any additional points that sharing here?
Yeah, I would agree with Michael, and that's a practice that we do. So we actually do quarterly culture pulse checks. That's what we call them, and we base the questions on our values. So, you know, how do you feel against this value and that value? And then at the end of the quarter, we'll look at that, and similar to what Michael said, are able to see, you know, team versus team and different discipline. You know, maybe certain discipline is feeling more burnt out or not aligned with the values at this time. And then we look at that data, and then we create action plans. And so that's one thing that I feel really strongly about, is if we're going to ask for feedback and ask how people are feeling towards the culture, that we better take action on it. So then we develop an action plan and some key takeaways, and then we start to, you know, align our initiatives around those types of things. But it is something we're doing on a quarterly basis.
Just double clicking on that then, Natanya, on those, that action plan sounds really interesting. Is that something that you share out with your team, or is that kept within the people operations and executive team, and then you sort of work behind the scenes to execute on it?
We're transparent with that. So we'll send a company update, and we'll say this is the main themes from the survey, and this is what we're committed to, and these are the key things that we're going to do. Holds us more accountable if we can be transparent with the types of things that you know, the tribe has spoken, so let's take action and share that back.
Bruce, I'll pass to you.
I was going to add, Aprio actually went so far as to take an ENPS, like Employee Net Promoter Score, which I thought was really interesting. Very much, and they present it and show it by group and department, and also they use a tool called Office Vibe, where basically there's constant feedback, and where you encourage people to give their feedback, which is we're going to talk about. But there's, again, it gets back to some of the tools and data, like Natanya was talking about.
We measure ENPS, and that's one of our key metrics for my team specifically.
Yeah, I think so. We're definitely segueing into the next topic, and we can just jump straight into this. But we'd love to get some ideas of how we can cultivate that culture of feedback in a growing team. You know, naturally, when a team is in its more infant years, it's very easy, to solicit feedback. The water cooler conversations between founders or executive teams and new team members, or existing matured or longer tenured team members. But as teams continue to grow, there's less of that human-to-human interaction, perhaps. Would love to hear some ideas of sort of the tools and the methods and the cadence that we're using to collect that feedback and really instill that culture of hearing and opening up the voice of employees.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first on that one. So I feel like a bit of a talking parrot, but I'm going to bring up the values again. So first off, I think it's really important to make it part of your values. One of our values at A Thinking Ape is keep growing. So we can then frame all of our feedback conversations to highlight how it's living and supporting our values. We place a lot of emphasis on the importance of self-improvement and individual development plans, and we feel the best way to have that ongoing conversation is using the one-on-one as a vehicle for that, and sharing that feedback journey. So I think it's really important to use the one-on-ones, to introduce it in values. We talk a lot about the radical candor method as well. If that's, I guess, a resource I'd share. If people aren't familiar, definitely read the book by Kim Scott. It's awesome, and we talk about that all the time. And And it's also really important to offer guidance on how to deliver and receive feedback. I think you can have this expectation of wanting your employees to give feedback if they don't feel tooled up and how. And actually, this is something that came up recently for our team in one of our quarterly culture pulses around wanting more tools on how to deliver good feedback, both as to my peer group and up to my manager. So we're just starting to scrape the surface with this stuff. But providing solid frameworks like the DEAR method or the SBI method, for example, are really good ways to provide an easy approach for people to follow and feel more comfortable. And yeah, just being proactive with giving people those tools, I think, leans towards a more productive conversation, so they feel tooled up rather than lending to the gossip or the unproductive conversations.
Yeah, and Michael, I'll come to you in a moment's time, but definitely just rounding out your thoughts there, Natanya. I think we have a very similar methodology here internally in our team at Sapling. Again, it all stems from our values. We have 4 values here, one of them being seek perpetual growth, which we use as a underpinning philosophy that's brought across every way that we work day to day. And one of those vehicles is through weekly one-on-ones between a team lead and a team member on that team. And that is a two-way street of feedback that is delivered with the idea of continuous improvement. It can be a simple framework like what behaviors to start, stop, or continue, through to more elaborate feedback methodologies, which we've rolled out over time. And then jumping across to another thematic that you mentioned a couple of minutes ago around doing a kind of quarterly or biannual culture surveys, and then transparently showing the action plan. Again, that's something that we've also taken in our stride here at Sapling, running a company-wide culture survey, then doing a debrief and actually showing a lot of the live data and anonymized survey responses to the team in a brown bag or sort of town hall to the entire company, as well as hey, these are the 3 to 5 underlying thematics or patterns of things that we can do better at to continue driving a world-class employee experience. Off the back of those 5 points, we're going to roll it up into the coming quarter's OKRs, and it'll be a member of our executive team or people operations team who are responsible for driving forward on those initiatives. So I think tying the loop and not only having the instrument to collect the voice of the company, but then transparently showing what the voice looks like as a kind of a bottom line pattern, and then an action plan, and keeping that accountable on a quarterly OKR is something that we have found to be very helpful here internally at Sapling. Michael, I'm assuming, given your work over at Torch, that you've obviously got a lot of insight. So I'll pass straight across to you if you have anything to share here.
Yeah, thank you. That's why I was getting excited to build on the points that you and Natanya were making about kind of tools, mindset, and training. At Torch, we have our clients that engage our coaches through the Torch platform. They can get the tool enables that feedback of asking their team members for 360 and their other stakeholders for feedback on how they're doing as a leader. And then we have some good data to start with. But we also work on the mindset to make sure that our leaders, when they receive that feedback through the tools or soliciting it one-on-one with their employees, that they're in that growth mindset, that the feedback is a gift. Many times with our companies, we have to kind of bribe our customers to give us feedback. Like, if you fill out this survey, we'll give you a Starbucks gift card or something like that, a chance to win $1,000. Well, it's the same thing with our members of our company. If they give us feedback, we should look at it as a gift because they're trusting us not to get overly defensive or to have reprisals when they give us honest feedback. So we want to accept it as if we would accept a gift that's precious. And then for the training is like, how do you, one, accept it? And one of the things that I like to work with my clients is when you hear some feedback, don't debate it with them, don't argue with them, don't get defensive, just say thank you. Thank you for the feedback. So you acknowledge that you heard it. Then you decide what you want to put into your action plan, either personally or as a company, as Natanya was saying. And then you fulfill that cycle by saying, okay, I put in my action plan, and you check in with them. How am I doing on implementing your feedback? And you keep having that cycle of improvement and growth, and then you can measure again and say, now what do people think of my leadership? Or now what do they think of our company and our positive culture? You measure again after you've been checking in and implementing those things. And so that takes some training. Sometimes, like when I would try to help my employees how to give me feedback so that I wouldn't be defensive, is one way to say, hey boss, I'd like to see more of this or less of that. And to have a feed forward mindset. Instead of saying, hey boss, or hey company, you screwed this up in the past, you can say, hey company, or hey boss, I'd like to see these things in the future. And it's easier for us to hear when it's future oriented, because the past we can't change, but the future we can.
Great point. And I think this is going to very much segue into our next section here, which is, and Michael, I'd actually love to keep with you if that's okay, which is, obviously over time as teams continue growing, their fiefdoms start developing, and we kind of grow out of naturally in terms of the family to tribes to communities, and then start building out multiplied communities in that ecosystem. How do we maintain that culture where feedback that's provided one-to-one or one-to-many from team members up to executive teams is truly constructive and delivered through the right channels and vehicles, and it's we're preventing kind of gossip from developing around the water cooler on certain channels on Slack, either about company policies, company culture, or about specific people?
I'd say create and reinforce the channels of communication. So have those channels of communication and then advertise them. And if someone is gossiping, let's say Bart, you and I wanted to had some feedback for Alice, and Alice was our boss. Instead of complaining or saying, hey, maybe go to Alice directly and say, hey, Alice, I would love it if you could do a little more of this or a little less of that. Like, and maybe you would challenge me. Have you mentioned that to Alice instead of just complaining? Maybe she's unaware. And then Alice would probably be very responsible. She's like, yeah, I'm happy to do that. I wasn't aware. Thank you for letting me know. So you can have that culture of challenging one another. Say, instead of complaining about it, Michael, hey, why don't you talk to the person that you're having some feedback for?
This isn't meant to be a trite or overly simplistic question, but how do you educate a company of those norms? And let's say you've got a 500-person company with across 4 different locations. It could be international. How do you educate on those norms and on those channels? Maybe Michael or Bruce will pass it across.
Well, I'll give a quick answer and then pass it to Bruce. For me, I think what was really powerful, like when I was working with Bob Mueller when he was the FBI director, we would do an evaluation of his town hall meetings. And my favorite comment was, he said, I love that the director, the FBI director, engaged with the audience directly and answered questions, like you said, from wherever in the world, whatever question, whether they were, a senior executive agent or the mechanic working on a view car, anyone could ask the director a question and he would answer it in a positive way. And I said, I wish the head of my field office would act like the FBI director. And that role modeling then puts some pressure on the other executives in the FBI to step up their game and model that behavior.
Good point.
Interestingly enough, Aprio has what's called the 30 fundamentals. So when we joined the company last year, it's like, wow, that's a lot of fundamentals. And they start every meeting with the fundamental of the week, and someone gives an example of how they represented or had an experience with that fundamental. So it's constantly reinforced across the whole organization. One of my favorites is speak straight. So you talk about, don't talk behind the radio, speak straight. If you say what you mean what you say. And another one is what we call blameless problem solving. So whenever something comes up, you can say, well, no, we don't want to put any blame. Let's just solve it. Don't blame anybody, and do that. And I think that that having these 30 fundamentals is very instrumental in what you're talking about, and very much similar to what you all were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a lot there of kind of modeling, and then reinforcement. And it sounds like there's a lot that I guess a lot of this does rely on the leadership team of kind of communication and reinforcing.
Comes from the top down for sure. The CEO is adamant about it. It's his thing, and as kind of the CEO of the cloud group, I need to do the same thing.
Yep, absolutely. Moving on then to another topic. We heard an example shared by Michael earlier of kind of I think it was one of a police commissioner or chief kind of sharing right up front expectations around performance and alignment with company values, and saying if these aren't kind of aligned against, then we'll be having a similar conversation on the way out. And I want to use that as a capstone here to kind of get the panel's views on what does happen. What steps should we take when we just identify an employee who's not quite gelling and aligning with the company culture? How do we support and work around that? Is it something where we can put a specific individual on development plans? Is it no way, that's a deal breaker and we need to transition out of the team and company immediately? I'm sure there's going to be some dissenting views here, so we'd love to hear some of the different perspectives. Maybe Natanya or Alice, one of you would like to open up.
Sure, I can go. So when an individual is not buying into the culture, I mean, since we're small enough, we're a company of 115, I still am able to meet with that person to really usually try to understand what is the root of them not buying into it. And usually it's, there's another layer to it. So I do take the time to speak with them to further understand and how I can help, support them. And there are times that there might be some people that are not living our cultural values and, they were put on a performance improvement plan. And I know there's various opinions on that, but we were lucky that it was successful. This person was able to shape up a little bit and improve their work. At least that's what I have. So I'm very supportive in that way and really trying to understand and listen.
I would echo that and, have been able to position myself to be a resource in similar conversations. Something that we talk a lot about is, trying to figure out, is it a skill or versus the will? So is this challenge that maybe is showing up with a misalignment in values, is it really because it's a frustration with a lack of resource or a lack of training or a skilled potential challenge or deficiency? Or is it truly that it's misalignment from values because it's a motivation thing and the will to, want to do their job? And so we approach it with, definitely a conversation and kind of trying to dig down, is it a skill or versus a will? And if it's a will, that's definitely much harder to work around, but hopefully there is some other thing going on. And we have been in situations where through various conversations the individual has just, through deep digging into it, has realized that I'm actually have outgrown the organization, or there is a misalignment on values. I would be much happier doing something else, and they've chosen to leave. And in that case, I think it's a win, because then hopefully we're supporting that person to find the next opportunity that's going to be a better fit for them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alice and Natanya. Well, this next question, I'm very glad that this has come through from a member of the audience in advance of today's webinar. And obviously, Sapling, as an onboarding 2.0 provider for high growth companies, we really see that it's our bread and butter to help teams with culture and really make sure that culture is on their mind as they develop pre-boarding and onboarding programs for their new hiring experience. In fact, we actually have a couple of great resources that I'd love to recommend, and our team's actually going to add this into the chat panel for everyone to take a look at afterwards. One of those is actually called the Ultimate Guide to Onboarding, and the other is a popular blog that we have on our website called How Company Culture is Built Through Onboarding. Both are great resources that I'd highly recommend checking them out. For now, I'd love to again get some views from the team here dialing in. Perhaps, Alice, we could start this question with you. Do you have any thoughts over at House Canary, how you've been able to weave and embed culture during pre-boarding and onboarding?
Sure. And it actually starts that when we have a candidate coming in on board to our office, and then we talk about our company values there. In fact, it's when I do give them a tour, we actually have our conference rooms are named after our values. We have 7 values. It's respect, honor, amazing, destiny, craftsmanship, teamwork, and different. So then as I'm walking with them, I'm also talking about our values. I like to do that little walk just so they can see. And then of course, onboarding, I reiterate it and I have them actually read it out, knowing the fact that they might not read it. But that's one way that we kind of keep that in mind, our company values.
Right. So to kind of synthesize there, the company culture is actually weaved right into the candidate experience when you bring them on site, and that's kind of physically represented through the office experience of having your company values listed throughout the office environment.
Right.
Very much like that. Michael, Bruce, Natanya, any other thoughts to add in here?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just quickly play off of that. I think for us, we're thinking a lot about this much earlier on. So, we think by the time pre-boarding or onboarding is happening, that person should already have a great sense of your brand because they've interacted with it during the awareness stage and on your website or however you're making an impression before that person is even a candidate. So when they come into interview, they're already getting a taste of what your culture is through the way they interact with interviewers, and hopefully through the interview process, they're actually learning about your values. So we see the brand piece tied so closely to culture, and it's an opportunity to tell your story and make a really great impact and that impression all through the candidate experience and then to the employee journey and experience. So by the time the pre-boarding is happening and that first day company orientation is happening, somebody already has a really good sense of what the culture is and hopefully has made a decision to join your team based on that as well.
I look at the onboarding as in 3 phases because, again, I think we're a little bit different. There's becoming an Aprio employee, and they have a very structured onboarding with regard to bringing people into the office and doing all the training and all the things about what it's like to be an Aprio employee, about the 30 fundamentals and all the tools that we use and everything that goes with that. That's number 1. The second piece is how do you function in Aprio Cloud to basically be a member of that group where it's remote and virtual and all the tools that we use and how we communicate and how we treat each other and how it's different because you're not in the same office. And then the third phase is how do you do your job, which again is going to be with the people that are part of the department or the group that you're doing it. Are you an indirect tax specialist? Are you an implementation software person? Are you a controller? Are you a tax preparer? Everyone's going to have a little bit of a different experience, I think. So I look at it as really 3 different phases, and we try to break it down into the 3 groups.
The only point I'll say here as an outro on this topic is really echoing Natanya's point in that candidates today, they're starting to understand your culture or make their own conclusions rather around your company culture well before they even come on site or dial in via video or audio conference for the interview experience. It's that they're learning through touch points of every aspect of your employer brand, whether that's through your social media, whether that's through your website, whether that's through your software review websites and how people talk about you on Glassdoor and on LinkedIn. So recognizing that that culture is being shared and represented publicly and is being absorbed by candidates very, very early on, well before day 1 of employment. And then second point is really ensuring that every team member is really responsible for showcasing and being proactive in introducing the new hire to that company culture. And that starts with the founding and executive team all the way down, ensuring that they have an active role to play in the onboarding programs as well. All right, so moving on again to continuing the point here of kind of company culture and really involving upper management. I'd love to get some understandings here around how to build a business case for developing a positive culture with executive teams and upper management. Again, we heard about this quite a few times from questions shared in advance, and we know from a lot of the best practices and data in the industry how important culture is. There's statistics like positive company culture can cause a 25 to 60% reduction in employee turnover. So we all know what we should be doing, but sometimes we hear from teams that they just, I guess, are at odds between what the people and culture team may want to be doing versus what the executive or C team think they should be doing. So we'd love to hear some examples of any sort of personal stories we can hear around how we can be aligning and influencing executive and upper management teams of building that positive culture. Michael, Alice, let's start with you if you have any points.
Sure. Like the first thing that comes to mind for me is I took this Harvard Business School class where it was on service management, like if you're a company that provides services. And there, as you mentioned, Bart, there's a lot of research that talks about how your employees are feeling and how that affects their retention, but it also affects how they interact with customers. And I remember this professor drawing out this business cycle of when you have happier employees, it leads to happier customers because they're the touch points. They're the ones that are either providing the products, they're on the phone with your customers, that are on social media. They're talking about your brand. And so if they're happier, you're probably going to have happier customers. And there's research that backs that up. So that's another aspect, not just retaining them, but also in terms of your company performance and customer loyalty. I think that hopefully that any executive team would resonate with like our audience members. I understand are mostly heads of people or HR, that if they are not agreeing that there's at least a goal to have a positive culture, then maybe you're in the wrong place because you have a real uphill battles ahead of HR if you're not resonating. But I think when you put business case, it's probably like you're trying to pitch some sort of investment. And so you might want to say, what would be the return on investment if we go this direction in trying to build a positive company culture? And then that, if you can do some cost benefit analysis and you link it to this is how much it costs to recruit and hire new people. So if we have this kind of benefit in terms of retaining, it'll avoid this type of costs incurred by the company in the future. And maybe the CFO will then raise their hand and say, yep, okay, I'm in on that. So it's how do you persuade the executive team to buy in maybe in your culture building program?
Yeah, very, very much like that. So presenting it in the language of the team that you're talking to, if it's a CFO or someone more numerically or quantifiably aligned, bring it to them in terms of more that here's the benefit, here's the upfront cost, but here's the over longer term return on that investment. Alice, Bruce, and
VP of sales might resonate. Well, okay, that my employees are going to be more happy when they talk with the customers, right? Okay, that resonates with that member of the executive team. Like, so think about your audience and how that you might build your case and the way you're presenting it that will be persuasive.
Yeah, absolutely. Alice, Bruce,
yeah, so for me, it's definitely interacting closely with our CFO and showing the data because we are a data company. So of course, my executives will respond more to see the numbers of how much it costs to do a eternal happy hour or all that and the value that it brings for a company. Another thing that I also bring up is some statistics to show some proof of that, and also talking about, not sure if everyone has heard of this concept of psychological safety, right? You want to make sure that your employees are feeling heard and comfortable. If they're busy thinking about, oh, what if, should I say this or should I not, or thinking about all these negative things and they don't feel safe, that's not really a positive work environment. So that's something that I also bring up so people are aware.
Alice, I'm putting you on the spot here, but the example you just mentioned around building a business case for a happy hour, again, it sounds really simplistic, but I'm sure there are people dialing in who are like, yeah, how do you actually do that? Like, how do you actually build a business case to say we want X hundreds or thousands of dollars to run a happy hour? Is it just a one-page Google Doc, or is there a template? Where are you citing the statistics and the ROI case from?
Sure. I mean, to be honest, they're already bought in, so I haven't really formalized a formalized business case. They're on board with it. So I probably had to build more of a business case when I was working at a larger company when I was at Cisco. That was a little bit more challenging for sure. It is also talking to the other executives that are bought into it, right? Getting that support. I did a lot of that, influencing that way. Just you look at your executive board, people in the leadership, you talk to everyone, see what their stance on this, and when they're in those leadership meetings, you have that person to support you. So that was one way that I did it. I find simplistic, but different environments, I guess.
Amazing. Great. Well, thank you for running that out, Alice. So all of these tips have been incredibly helpful, and we're up to kind of the last of our formal set of questions before we jump over to audience questions that have been submitted over the last 50 minutes. And this last one is really trying to get an understanding of the number of HR or people operations team members that we think is really best practice it takes today in building out and maintaining a really strong and healthy company culture. So as a company goes from that size of, say, 50 employees to 250 to 500 to 1,000, is there some sort of magic number that we should be thinking about in terms of ratios of HR or people operations team members to workforce size? I mean, Natanya can start that question. I know you've been on the journey with your company as you've gone through growth and previous places of work. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, and this is something that in my peer network group, the question comes up a lot, and I've come to the conclusion that there's no consistency and there isn't really a formula. I think it really depends on the organization and what their business objectives are and what type of people-focused organization they want to be, and exactly how much the founders or the CEOs want to invest in the culture piece early on. I don't think that if you want to align your business strategy with the people strategy and create this amazing place for people to do their best work, you can't do that with just one person, and you need a lot of bandwidth. And the earlier that you can build out a really high functioning people team, then the more robust those people programs and initiatives can be to support all of those amazing things that we've already talked about today around the feedback and the psychological safety and the culture pulse surveys and the actions and all these things. So I mean, in my case, I think we're really unique. We're close to about 80 headcount, and I have myself plus 3. So I think I'm really proud that the founders of our company feel very strongly to invest in the people and culture side. But I know that, there's companies, neighbors to us, who have like 300 employees and there's 2 people. So I think it really just depends.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. All right. So a very big thank you to all of today's speakers. It's been a great discussion. Now I want to put up on the screen in front of everyone the SHRM credits that are available for today's webinar. We're now going to switch over to our audience Q&A. Before we do, we're going to actually share a poll live, offering everyone the option to speak with members of the Sapling, Torch, or Deputy teams and learn more around the ways that our products and teams can help your organization develop a thriving company culture. All right, so I was going to leave this up on the screen for a moment. Now, as this poll is coming alive, we're also going to jump in and answer some of the questions that you've all been sending throughout today's webinar. If we don't get to your question, I highly encourage you to reach out to myself, Bart at trysapling.com, or also on LinkedIn, and the other speakers after the webinar. We'll be more than happy to answer any of the questions that you have. All right, so the first question, I'd love to point this across to Michael. It's around how do we go about navigating C-suite leadership who are not modeling positive culture practices? So you talked before around the importance of modeling, and you gave a great example from your time at the FBI. This question's come in from a member of the audience today. So again, just to replay that question, how do we navigate C-suite leadership who are not modeling positive culture practices?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Bart. So a coach can help with that, right? If someone had a growth area on your executive team, a coach is someone they can work with in private and have a chance to build their skill set in that area. And when they're ready, if they are courageous and have some humility, then they can reach out to other stakeholders and say, how am I doing now that I have a coach and I'm working on this area? That would be one way of doing it. And then if you want to reinforce it, then you also align incentives with the positive culture. So over time, the FBI matured in this way. And so our climate surveys, we did climate surveys, and then I would get that as an FBI supervisor my first year. I was like, okay, and I would color code it. It would show me, here's green, I'm good in these areas, yellow in these areas, better watch those, red, ooh, you better improve, or you might not be a supervisor anymore. And then over time, as people got better at that, we built it into promotions, how they were doing on climate surveys. So if I want to get promoted, I better pay attention to culture. So as an organization, we are aligning incentives with making sure the members of the executive team and others do that. And I remember Jim Comey, when he was the FBI director, he actually published that people would get the highest climate survey ratings of all supervisors. And then he held himself accountable and said, you'll notice I am not on this list.
That is interesting. Awesome. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that kind of that scorecard approach and aligning the team around that. Alice, we're going to move across to you, maybe a 45-second reply, if we can give it there, just to make sure we get through Bruce and Natanya following. A member from today really liked some of the examples you shared around building out team culture as the organization grows. That they're asking if you could share any other low-cost ways to build out a thriving culture.
Sure. We've done potlucks, a bake-off. Those are low-cost ways. Lunch and learns are always good because it's really engaging if someone's sharing. Like for instance, I'll give you an example. Someone shared, which I did not think was going to be a very fascinating topic, but they talked about apples, and I was really surprised on how he presented it. So that really is a low-cost way for people to, get to know one another and also, interact and share something new.
Yeah. So seconding that, we have the same approach at Sapling, a regular spot within our bi-weekly company all hands is a guest speaker segment, and a team member rotates every week or every session. Sorry, a team member jumps in and shares a topic either related to general professional development, could be a synopsis of a book they're reading, or something related to the role, and they get up and share that around. Great. Moving across then, Bruce, a quick question for you. Any tips on maintaining a positive culture in times of organizational change? Obviously, your team's gone through a lot of growth and change over recent years. And maybe, again, a 30 to 45-second quick tips here.
I think it's important, and somebody said this earlier, to stay to the roots. So an example would be, I used to have a weekly call with the entire team. And as we grew, we got a little bigger. We couldn't have a weekly call with the entire team. So we had weekly calls with each department, and then we moved it to a monthly call with the entire team. So you still get the same looking forward to seeing everybody, and frankly seeing me and me seeing them. And I give a kind of a CEO report, and we are a completely transparent organization, so they get financials and results and what's good and what's bad and our initiatives, because when they're spread out in different departmental lines, they don't know what's going on and everything else in the company. And I think that's really important. So I think the communication and transparency and staying to what you were doing, even though it has to change a little bit, is really important.
Great update. And then last but not least, Natanya, maybe you can help round this one out for the lineup of panelists today. Someone's asking just if they can share any mistakes that we've made so we can all learn from when it comes to building a positive company culture. Do you have any mistakes that you feel comfortable publicly sharing?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question because we're trying to figure out in our organization right now, how can we celebrate failures more? And that's something that we, want to really expose and kind of create that psychological safe environment where people can feel vulnerable, because we know if we can be vulnerable, we can make better decisions and grow and, live our value of keep growing. So I think a mistake that for me is just that I haven't been thinking about that earlier on. And so now we're trying to embed this more so into the culture now, which I wish we had started, probably earlier on.
Huge point. I heard, I think it was Alice bring up psychological safety, or maybe it was you, Natanya, psychological safety before. Bruce mentioned it earlier with blameless problem solving. I think these are all, I think an entire book should be written on this subject. I think it's going to be very helpful, and hope to see more of it in the public discourse soon. All right, so I think that's all we have time for today. Again, a very big thank you for joining in and submitting those great questions. And of course, a very big thank you to our co-hosts, Torch and Deputy. And in particular, thank you to our incredible panelists, Michael, Alice, Bruce, and Natanya. You can find them all and myself on LinkedIn if you'd like to go into a deep dive discussion on anything that you heard today. And of course, we'll be sending around a recording early tomorrow, so you can rewatch the webinar and share this out with your team and network. You can also check out more of our webinars at saplinghr.com, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.